Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So I know I will not be there, and I told you I was going to walk you through what you were going to have to do for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So let's go ahead and start with your homework. You were supposed to have gotten the definitions for the 7 defining features of modernism from your textbook. And as we noted, the online textbook version did not have both pages that you needed. So I wanted to take a few minutes and actually walk you through some of the definitions that you should have gotten from your hardbook copy. Because I know you guys all made sure to do your homework for today. Alrighty, so starting with the very first one, you had a rejection of traditional themes and subject matter. The definition that I was hoping that you would come away with was this idea that instead of the typical love plot, authors in the modernist era actually wrote on the inability of people to actually commit to one another, or this inability to communicate with each other. And you started to have characters who, instead of following the typical love storyline where two people meet, fall in love, you actually had two characters who actually could not communicate with each other this love that they had for each other, or they could not communicate what it was that they were feeling one to another. So not your typical storyline when it comes to relationships. It was actually the hardships with relationships. So instead of marriage and the community, they often wrote of broken relationships and broken lives. So again, they kind of took a 180, and they didn't give you the typical love story that we've come to expect with two characters. They actually wrote on some of the harsh realities that come with relationships and how sometimes they don't end in a happy ending, and sometimes you do have characters who have hard lives. So that was what I was looking for number one, a rejection of traditional themes and subject matter. Again, not your typical theme with a happy ending. You actually had some dark themes coming into play. For the second definition, a focus on alienated individuals rather than heroes who stood for the values of society. I know it's a little bit of a mouthful, so let's break it down. When it refers to alienated individuals, well, you're actually referring to characters who are kind of the loner characters. They're alienated and by society and by friends, people in the community, because they're maybe different and they don't stand out as, being a heroic character. So typically, you would have in stories these characters that we'd actually look up to. Here, you actually have the quiet character that most people wouldn't notice. Okay. So the basic definition that I was looking for you to get was, instead of having main characters who could be described as strong and hero-like, you would see insecure, lonely figures who were consumed with self-doubt and despair. So again, kind of a 180. You wouldn't have these strong, heroic characters that we're kind of used to. You would actually have these characters who, for the most part, were the quiet people in society, the people no one paid attention to, because what did they really have to offer in terms of literature? Well, according to the modernists, these were everyday people who were filled with self-doubt and had despair, and their story was just important enough to tell. You shouldn't always focus on these hero characters that in reality don't exist. Number three, frequent themes of impermanence and change. If something is impermanent, it's the opposite of permanent, meaning it's constantly changing. Okay? So going along with number one, you rejected the traditional theme. Instead, the modernist writers would focus on themes that had to do with how things are constantly changing, so nothing is permanent. The basic definition that I wanted you to get from that one was that for most modernists, nothing lasted. Neither human institutions nor human attachments. Human institutions are things that we as human beings have created, like school is an institution. Okay? So according to them, nothing ever lasted. Eventually, all things come to an end. The key one there is that they felt that human attachments don't last either. So again, going with this idea of broken dreams, broken relationships, our attachment to one another, according to the modernists, never lasts. So to continue with the definition, for many modern writers, life was always changing and evolving to include progress. So while we may see this idea of things constantly changing and nothing everlasting as a negative, they looked at it as more of something that needs to happen in order for progress to occur. If things don't ever change, then how are we supposed to progress? Number 4, the use of understatement and irony to reveal important emotions and ideas. Okay, so you want to make sure that you understand, well, irony we've talked about before. Now, irony is when the opposite of what you expect to happen is what actually happens. When something is an understatement, it's pretty much you understood what the author was trying to say, even though it didn't come right out and blatantly say it. Okay, so that's an understatement. He understated what he really meant. So the use of understatement and irony to reveal important emotions and ideas. In other words, instead of coming right out and the author explained to you what the character was feeling, they actually use irony, and you just have to figure it out based on the irony that they use. Likewise with the understatement, it's understated what the idea is, and you as a reader are left to figure it out. Okay, so the basic definition that I was looking for you to find: unlike the transcendentalists, modernists no longer felt confident enough to state universal truths directly in their works because they felt life was always changing. So this idea that for the modernists, because things were always changing, they didn't come out with these important, life lessons that the transcendentalists would always try to tell us. If you think back to our unit on the transcendentalists, they said things, like carpe diem, seize the day. For the modernists, they weren't comfortable coming out with those huge proclamations. Instead, readers would be left to form their own conclusions. So essentially, the modernists left it up to you as the reader. They would give you the story, they would give you these understatements and this ironic thing that happened to people, and then you were kind of left to figure it out for yourself. Well, what did you think? Okay. Number 5, the use of symbols and images that suggest meanings rather than statements that explain meanings. Pretty much the easiest way that I can explain that one to you is this idea of showing versus telling. As authors, as writers, the modernists wouldn't just come right out and tell you things. They would instead be very descriptive to show you what it is that they're trying to make you understand. Okay? So instead of coming out and telling readers what the writer thought, writers would use such writing techniques as figurative language to show readers a character's emotions, the character's thoughts, etc. Figurative language, those are the things that we talk about in English class. So metaphors, similes, and all of these things are used instead of the author coming out and telling you, oh, he felt sad. Well, they're going to make a metaphor and say that his face could be compared to a dark rain cloud. Okay, so you definitely get the sense that the character was sad. They didn't tell you that, but you could figure it out based on the figurative language that they used. Number 6, the use of stream of consciousness technique to show what's going on both inside and outside the characters. Stream of consciousness was a brand new technique that hadn't been used before by writers. And stream of consciousness just pretty much means that the author tried to write in a way that put you inside the character's head. And if you really, really think about what's going on in our heads, it's really scrambled. Think about maybe what's going through your mind right now. Part of you is listening to me, and then for a split second, you're thinking, hey, this is kind of cool, this person is talking to me. And then, oh, you go back to, wait, oh yeah, she's actually telling me something important, I should focus. But then maybe your stomach starts grumbling, and you start thinking, hey, I'm kind of hungry, I didn't get breakfast this morning. And then suddenly, oh wait, I'm supposed to be paying attention. That idea of how our consciousness, our mind is kind of going all over the place, that's stream of consciousness. So what you end up getting is just a rambling of all these things that are going on inside the character's mind. So as you can imagine, it's kind of confusing. I mean, if you ever really stop and think about everything that goes on in one person's head at any given minute, it's a lot. So the basic definition that I wanted you to get away from that one: stories would be structured on the central characters, sometimes disconnected, but revealing inner thoughts, feelings, and dreams. So even though it was kind of a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different things going on inside the character's mind, the fact that they chose to share those personal things with the readers would actually show you something about the character. Okay. Number 7. This one's really, really important. The tip of the iceberg. Although modernist writers often describe the character's actions, feelings, and thoughts, they do not interpret the significance of these for the reader. Okay, think about what that's saying. They'll describe what the actor was doing, they'll describe what the character was feeling, what they thought in their head, but they're not going to tell you what all of these things meant. You have to put the pieces together. The reader is left to infer how a character feels towards each other based on their actions and from what they do not say to each other, along with the little that they do say to each other. In other words, it's this idea that you have to read between the lines. So when you are in a relationship and you ask your significant other, what's wrong? Well, sometimes they'll say nothing. You know something's wrong. You can tell based on the tone of voice of how they said nothing. You can tell based on the facial expression that they said to you as they said nothing. And that's what the modernist writers were trying to get at. So much can be inferred not just on what they do give you, but on what they leave out. And you're left trying to read between the lines and figure out, okay, what did they want me to figure out for myself? They didn't come right out and tell me. I have to figure it out. Okay? Hemingway once said, I always try to write on the principle of the iceberg. There's 7/8 of it underwater for every part that shows. And I think that's a good imagery to kind of give you a visual of what they were talking about for this characteristic. So the tip of the iceberg, modernists would actually give you this along the surface. So they'd give you, okay, maybe a little bit of what the character said to another character. Maybe they'd briefly describe, what the character was doing. And you, as a reader, have to figure out what do those things actually mean. So the fact that, he walked over and purposely ignored his girlfriend, oh, I can infer that they're probably having trouble and maybe they're fighting. Okay, you're left to infer all of that based on the little that they do give you. So it does take some skill, and we're going to be working on this a lot throughout this unit as we talk about modernist writers. So what I had wanted you to do is, if you need to make any additions to your definitions on that cardstock paper that I left you with on Monday, please do so. Use my screencast from today as a guide to help you fill that in. And remember, I put it on cardstock because you're going to use this over and over and over again. And we're actually going to start using it today. So now that you have the basic definitions, I want you to bring up your Richard Cory doc that I shared with you and have out the Richard Cory poem. So the poem was in a paper copy. You should have it. Okay. And then the doc that you want to have out, again, is one that I already shared with you. Okay. It should be in your drive. Once you have those out, I'm actually going to model for you what I want you to do. So within Richard Cory, I'm telling you already, I'm telling you this, that you will be able to find examples of the 7 defining features of modernism in the poem Richard Cory. Not all 7 may necessarily be in that poem. And I'm going to walk you through it so you can see how I would go about doing this. So the first one, in Richard Cory, do we see this first defining feature, a rejection of traditional themes and subject matter? Well, if we started by saying that the typical theme would have to do with, this two people meet and they fall in love, or, some sort of happy ending, I would say that Richard Cory definitely shows this defining feature of modernism, because you had a character who we felt was on top of his game. He was wealthy, he was loved, he was adored, people looked up to him, they wanted to be like him. And then he actually ends up committing suicide despite having all of this. I think that's a rejection of the traditional subject matter. You would expect him to continue living a happy life and maybe be proud of everything he's accomplished, but instead, you can tell he's unhappy with his life, and so he takes his own life. Okay, so just to give you an idea of how we're going through this, okay? You fill out your own as you're going through with mine. Okay, so if you want to have split screens up, you can go ahead and do that. Moving on, next one. A focus on alienated individuals instead of focusing on the heroes who stood for the values of society. This one's tough because some people would argue that Richard Cory is a hero. He represents the hero of his society because everyone did look up to him. But you have to look at it between the lines. He was alienated. He felt, we can infer, different from everyone else. Everyone else kind of seemed to put him on a pedestal. If you see back in the poem, it talks about how we people on the pavement looked at him. So you get this sense of separation. It's we and it's him. Okay? And then again, so we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. Richard Cory never had to deal with any of that. So you definitely get the sense that there is a separation, and Richard Cory is nothing like the townspeople, and so you do have these elements of the separation. Okay? All right, moving on. Frequent themes of impermanence and change. So remember, if something is impermanent, it's the opposite of permanent. So it's not permanent, it's constantly changing. So within Richard Cory, do we see this idea that things are constantly changing and nothing ever is permanent? I would argue that we do see some elements of it. Okay, so here, well, nothing stays the same in the sense that Richard Cory didn't go on leading his happy life. Things did change. Okay, things did not stay the same. For him, he actually ended up killing himself. So obviously there was a change there. And for the townspeople, I would argue that things probably changed for them too. Hopefully after this incident, they started to realize, well, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And they started to re-examine their own values and what it is that they want to do. Okay, so just some notes to keep you going. Moving on, the use of understatement and irony to reveal something important. So let's start with the easy one, irony. Irony is when the opposite of what you expect to happen is what actually happens. So obviously the ending here is very ironic. We did not expect someone in Richard Cory's position to actually kill himself. But remember, there's two parts to this. So it's not just that they're using irony, but they're using irony and or understatement to reveal something important. So what's the important thing that they're revealing here? Well, that's the theme. And the important thing that they were trying to show you here, and again, notice they didn't come right out and tell it to you. You had to infer it. Well, the irony that Richard Cory killed himself despite being in the position that he was shows us that just because you have this money, just because you are admired and loved, doesn't make you happy. So it revealed that money doesn't always buy you happiness. So the first part is the irony, and then you get what does it reveal. Okay, there is no understatement here. Next one, the use of symbols and images that suggest meanings rather than using statements that explain meanings. So symbols weren't necessarily in Richard Corey. There was no one symbol that really stood out, but the images I think were pretty strong. We had this image of, a gentleman who was clean favored and imperially slim, so I can imagine that. There's this image of the people on the pavement and looking up at him, almost like he's in another world. Right? The image of him walking and fluttering pulses. Um, and this one was very, very telling. The last stanza. So we worked and waited for the light, and you can just imagine these townspeople continuing to work, and sitting at their kitchen table with, oh, here we go, we're eating bread again, wish we could actually afford meat. So all of these images were really, really strong. Okay. And again, that's just the first part of the defining feature of modernism. You have this second part. They're using symbols and images to explain meanings. Okay, so they're going to suggest it. You're going to have to figure it out on your own. Okay, so the suggestion here. Well, again, we have to infer. What are they suggesting here? Oops, sorry about that. Okay, well, the suggestion that maybe the townspeople, yeah, they're going to continue working hard because they want to get to where Richard Cory is, but maybe that's not what they should be focusing on. Maybe they shouldn't necessarily focus on trying to be like him because, well, look at where it got him. And so going back to the theme. All right, we're almost at the end. The use of stream of consciousness. So remember, you get these rambled, jumbled thoughts. You actually feel like you're inside a person's head. You definitely didn't get that here. That you didn't feel like you were in his head at all. You had to infer a lot of things. So this one was a none. The tip of the iceberg. Were there parts here where we were forced as readers to figure things out on our own? Definitely. I mean, when you think about the ending, it doesn't tell you why Richard Cory killed himself. We are left to infer that. So that's my think out loud, just to kind of walk you through how you're going to have to actually apply these 7 defining features of modernism in the text as we continue. And for homework, what you're going to have to do is the exact same thing that I did here, but you're going to have to do it for Lucinda Matlock. So I've pushed that doc out to you. Okay, it is in your Google Drive folder for my class. So you'll see it. It looks just like this. And you're going to do exactly what we did together, but this time you're going to do it on your own. So going through the poem Lucinda Matlock, tell me which of these do you see examples of? Remember, if there is no example of that feature from modernism, then you just write none. But don't simply write none just because you don't want to do the work. Remember, I do look at this and I do grade it. Okay? So that's your homework for tonight. Good luck, and then I'll be sending along the screencast for Thursday and Friday class shortly.